Welcome to Peza Horror Stories. Tonight, I need you to do one thing before we begin. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself. Because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it is a real encounter, one that will haunt you long after the video ends. This tale was sent to me by one of our loyal listeners. And trust me, once you hear what happened, you'll never look at cemeteries the same way again. But before we dive in, if you enjoy true horror stories, make sure you subscribe to Peza Horror Stories, turn on the bell icon, and share this video with your friends. Because every week, I bring you terrifying encounters from people just like you. And one day, it might be your story that I tell here. My name is Sarah, I live in Ohio, and what I'm about to tell you happened when I was pregnant with my first child. At the time, I was staying with my mother in an old house built onto church property. The walls were cracked, the wood groaned at night, and silence always pressed in once the sun went down. But none of that frightened me. What terrified me was what stood right next to the house. A massive cemetery, a place so old, its graves had sunk into the earth, the tombstones broken and twisted like crooked teeth. Everyone in town whispered about it. They said if you walked too close after midnight, you would hear something chilling, the sound of a woman crying, wailing for her lost children. I thought it was just superstition, until one night when I heard her with my own ears. Sarah explained that during the final month of her pregnancy, her health was fragile. She often felt weak, and even the smallest tasks exhausted her. Her mother, deeply worried, insisted that Sarah move back home so she could take care of her during those difficult weeks. And so, Sarah stayed in her mother's apartment, a place that wasn't just any home. It was part of the upper floor of an old church property. The church itself stood tall, its paint peeling, its bells long silent. But what unnerved Sarah the most wasn't the church at all. It was what lay just beyond the walls. Her mother's kitchen window looked directly out into a cemetery, a sprawling graveyard that had stood for over a century. The place was suffocating. Enormous oak trees stretched their limbs like shadows across the tombstones. Many headstones were cracked, tilting or half swallowed by the earth. And at night silence pressed down so heavy, it felt alive. But this graveyard wasn't just known for its age or its size. It carried a legend. For decades, townsfolk whispered that after midnight, if you stood too close, you could hear something terrible. The faint sobs of a woman crying. They said she had lost her children in life. And now in death, she wandered between the graves, wailing through the night, searching endlessly for the little ones she could never hold again. Most people brushed it off as folklore. But Sarah, she was about to discover that legends are sometimes rooted in something terrifyingly real. It was one of those suffocating summer nights, the kind where even the walls seemed to sweat. The heat inside the apartment was unbearable. So Sarah's family had carried thin mattresses up to the flat roof. Under the open sky, they hoped to catch whatever cool breeze the night would allow. By midnight, everyone was fast asleep, scattered across the rooftop. But around 1 a.m. Sarah stirred. Her stomach grumbled. It wasn't unusual, her pregnancy often left her craving food at odd hours. Quietly, she turned to her father, who was half asleep nearby. "Dad, can I have the kitchen keys? I just need a little food." Her father's eyes snapped open, sharper than she expected. He hesitated. Then, in a low, uneasy voice, he said, "Fine, but don't go alone. Take Emily with you. Promise me." The request felt strange. The kitchen was just downstairs. Why was he so insistent? But Sarah nodded. Her younger sister Emily, rubbing her eyes and yawning, agreed to come along. Together, they took the heavy, rusted keys and crept toward the narrow staircase. The stairs were old, steep, uneven stone steps that seemed grown under each step. A single dim bulb buzzed overhead, its weak light flickering against the cracked plaster walls. The deeper they went, the quieter it grew. The sounds of the night above, the faint snores of their family, the hum of crickets, faded away. By the time they reached the bottom, Sarah felt it. The air was colder, still almost unnatural. She looked at Emily and whispered, "Do you feel that?" Emily just shivered and nodded. What awaited them in that kitchen would stay burned into their memories forever. As they carefully made their way down the final steps, Sarah suddenly grabbed Emily's wrist. Her voice was firm, almost trembling. "Listen to me," she whispered. "Whatever happens, don't look toward the cemetery side. Just keep your eyes on the ground." Emily frowned, confused, but nodded. She could see the seriousness in her sister's eyes. From the last step, the kitchen corridor opened up, and through the dusty, cracked window, they could see the graveyard outside. The moonlight spilled across rows of leaning, broken headstones. The silhouettes of giant oak trees swayed unnaturally, their twisted branches stretching across the graves like skeletal fingers. And then, it happened. A chilling gust of wind rushed past them, so sudden, so sharp, the kind that makes your skin crawl instantly. Just seconds ago, the night had been still, not even a leaf had moved on their way down. But now the air felt alive, almost as if it carried whispers within it. Sarah's heart pounded. She gripped the kitchen keys tighter, trying to ignore the pull of the cemetery outside. Her instincts screamed at her not to glance that way, but curiosity clawed at the edges of her mind. Emily's breathing quickened. She clutched Sarah's arm. "Why is it so cold here?" she whispered. Sarah forced a smile, but her lips trembled. "It's nothing. Just stay close." Yet, deep inside, both sisters knew this was not just the wind. Something was stirring in that graveyard. Something that had noticed them. The heavy wooden door creaked as Sarah pushed it open, and the sisters stepped into the dark, musty kitchen. The faint smell of old wood and dust hung in the air. Their footsteps echoed softly against the stone floor. At once, Sarah's eyes were drawn to the window. It was slightly open, the curtain shifting with every cold breath of wind. And just beyond that window was the cemetery. The row of graves stood tall in the moonlight, their cracked headstones glowing faintly like pale bones. Sarah quickly moved to the counter, her hands trembling as she uncovered the plate of food her father had left for her. The simple comfort of warm bread and lentils gave her a brief sense of safety. She sat down, whispering, "Let's eat quickly and go back." But before she could take her second bite, a voice, soft at first, almost like the rustling of leaves, but then clearer, sharper, a woman's voice carried through the open window. Sarah, both sisters froze. And then, sobbing, loud broken sobs that made the air heavier with every sound. "They killed my children. 4 of them," the voice wailed, rising and falling like a mourning mother. "Come, help me, you're a mother, you understand my pain." Emily's eyes widened in terror. She grabbed Sarah's arm, nails digging into her skin. "Please, let's go." "She's getting closer," she whispered, her voice cracking, but Sarah couldn't move. The voice grew more desperate, more commanding. "Look at me, look at me." The words echoed inside the kitchen walls as if the whole room was alive with her cries. Sarah's lips trembled. Every instinct screamed at her not to turn toward that window, not to see who or what was calling her name. Sarah sat frozen, clutching the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The cries outside grew louder, closer, pressing against the thin glass of the kitchen window. "They killed my children. 4 of them. Sarah, help me, look at me." The voice cracked into screams, almost shaking the walls. Emily buried her face against Sarah's shoulder, whispering desperately, "Don't look. Please, don't look." But curiosity, that dangerous, irresistible pull, gnawed at Sarah. Her heart pounded violently. Sweat dripped down her forehead. She told herself, maybe it's a grieving woman. Maybe someone really needs help. Her eyes, against her will, began to drift toward the window. And then it happened. For just a second, she looked. What she saw was not human. There, pressed against the cracked glass, was a woman's face, pale as death, eyes glowing a dull, sickly white. Her cheeks were wet with endless tears, but the skin was torn and rotting as if she had been buried long ago. Her mouth hung open unnaturally wide, and from it poured that horrible, endless sobbing. Emily screamed, pulling Sarah back, but it was too late. The figure at the window slammed her hands against the glass with a deafening bang. The entire kitchen shook, plates rattled. The lantern flickered wildly. The woman's voice turned guttural, twisted, no longer pleading, but commanding. "You looked at me, now you'll feel what I feel." The cries multiplied, as if dozens of unseen children were wailing in the graveyard. The sound clawed into their skulls, filling every corner of the house. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. She grabbed Emily's hand and whispered, "Run." But the window creaked slowly, as if someone was trying to force it open from the outside. Sarah yanked Emily toward the door, their bare feet slapping against the cold floor. The cries outside grew louder, dozens of voices now, shrieking, weeping, calling their names. Behind them, the kitchen window rattled violently, as if invisible hands were clawing at it. The sound of nails scraping against the glass sent shivers down their spines. They stumbled up the narrow staircase, but halfway up, Sarah froze. From below came heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was now inside the kitchen. Emily's voice cracked. "Sarah, she's in the house." The air grew suffocating, thick with the stench of damp earth, as if the graveyard itself had spilled inside. Then, without warning, the crying stopped. Silence, a silence so heavy, it felt louder than any scream. Sarah turned her head ever so slightly, peering down the stairwell, and her blood froze. At the bottom stood the figure, the woman from the window, her pale face tilted upward, her dead eyes locked on Sarah's. She wasn't walking. She wasn't moving. She just stood there, her mouth stretched open, trembling, as if ready to scream again. Emily let out a small whimper. That was enough. The woman twitched. Then, with unnatural speed, she began crawling up the staircase on all fours, her fingers bending backward like broken twigs. The sisters bolted, screaming for their parents. "Mama, Papa." Their mother burst from the bedroom, hair loose, clutching a lantern. Their father rushed out to panic in his eyes. What happened? Before Sarah could speak, the front door of the house slammed shut with a thunderous boom. The entire building shook. The crying returned, but this time, it wasn't just one woman. It was dozens of voices, hundreds maybe, echoing through the walls, through the windows, vibrating the floor beneath their feet. Emily collapsed to her knees, covering her ears. Sarah clutched her swollen belly, terrified for her unborn child. Her father shouted over the noise, "Everyone upstairs, now." The family rushed to the roof, slamming the trapdoor shut behind them. But as they huddled together under the night sky, one thing was clear. The cries hadn't stayed below. They were now all around them. Coming from the cemetery. Coming from the trees. Coming from the very air they breathed. The family huddled together on the rooftop, the dim lantern flickering in Sarah's mother's hand. The cries circled them like a storm, rising and falling, sometimes whispers, sometimes blood-curdling screams. It felt as though the entire cemetery had come alive, every broken grave releasing its grief. Into the night, Sarah clutched her belly, trembling, whispering prayers under her breath. Emily buried her face in their mother's shawl, sobbing. Their father stood tall, trying to stay strong, but even his lips quivered as the cold wind whipped around them. And then, silence. The sudden, suffocating kind of silence that crushes the chest. Even the wind stopped. Even the dogs in the distance no longer howled. The world froze. Sarah's heart pounded. Her eyes darted across the rooftop, and then she saw it. At the far corner of the roof stood the woman. No sound, no footsteps had warned them. She was just there, her back hunched, her long white dress fluttering unnaturally, though the air was still. Her wet hair clung to her pale, ruined face. Her eyes locked on Sarah's belly. And then, in that horrible, broken voice, she whispered, "Give me your child. I lost mine. Give me yours." The family gasped in horror. Sarah's mother pulled her close, shouting, "Stay back. Leave us." But the woman didn't stop. She began to crawl toward them on hands and knees, her joints cracking loudly with every movement. Her mouth widened into an impossible scream, showing blackened gums and shattered teeth. The lantern flickered wildly. Emily shrieked, "She's coming." Their father grabbed a heavy stick lying near the water tank and swung it desperately. But the woman didn't flinch. The stick passed through her, as if she was made of smoke and sorrow. The cries grew louder again. Now they were all around the rooftop, echoing from the cemetery, from the very sky. The woman lunged closer, her face now inches away from Sarah's. Her breath reeked of decay as she hissed, "Look at me. Feel my pain," Sarah screamed, her whole body shaking, clutching her stomach. In sheer terror, she shouted the only words she could, calling on God's name. At that instant, the lantern's flame roared bright. casting a golden light. The woman shrieked in fury, her form twisting, her face stretching unnaturally, and then she dissolved into smoke, vanishing into the night air. The cries stopped. Only the sound of Sarah's sobbing remained, echoing across the rooftop. The family sat frozen, pale and drenched in fear, knowing they had witnessed something not of this world. But Sarah knew one thing for certain: the woman's eyes, her voice, her grief, they were burned forever into her memory. The family didn't sleep that night. They remained huddled on the rooftop until the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. Only then did the cries vanish completely, leaving behind an eerie, unnatural silence. Sarah's father was the first to move. His hands trembled as he opened the trapdoor and led the family downstairs. The kitchen was in ruins, the window shattered, plates scattered across the floor, as if a storm had raged inside. Sarah was pale, drained, her body weak from terror. Her mother wrapped her in a blanket, whispering prayers over and over. Emily refused to step near the kitchen again. Later that day, when the neighbors heard what had happened, their faces turned grim. One old man shook his head and muttered, "It was her. The woman of the graves. Over 100 years ago, she lost her children in a fire near this church. Since then, she roams, crying for them, calling out to any mother she finds." Sarah's blood ran cold. She realized the whispers, the sobbing, the face at the window, they weren't just haunting sounds. They were a curse, a mother's endless grief that would never rest. Days turned into weeks, but Sarah was never the same. Every night, even in silence, she swore she could still hear faint sobbing at the edge of her dreams. And one truth stayed with her forever: not every place belongs to the living. Some places, like that graveyard, will forever belong to those who cannot move on. So the next time you walk near an old cemetery at night, or hear a woman's cry in the dark, remember this story and ask yourself, is it really someone alive or something else? This was today's story, The Woman Who Cries at Midnight. If it chilled your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Peza Horror Stories for more true encounters and terrifying tales. Your support keeps these stories alive, even if some of the souls behind them never really died.